Welcome to Intimacy Evolution, the podcast that helps you enjoy deeper connection and more intimacy in your relationships. I'm Brianna Carey, relationship and intimacy coach, and together with my husband Mark, a licensed professional counselor, we're here to help couples to create the relationships they crave. Relationships evolve over time, and that's okay. Let's talk about it. Have you ever experienced an internal voice telling you you're not good enough? I know I have. It's that critical internal voice telling me that I'm not a good enough parent, not a good enough partner, business owner, and so on. We often are our own worst critics. It can impact not only how we feel about ourselves, but how we interact in our relationships as well. Where does this voice even come from? And how can we get it to stop? We'll answer that in this episode. Neuroscientist Cody Isabel joins us today to discuss the different parts of the IFS, internal family systems, and how they might be affecting our relationships and our motivation levels. This was a truly fascinating insight into our nervous system and the healing process, and I can't wait to hear what you think of it. Do you want to experience more pleasure in your life? We can help. We'll share what to do next at the end of this episode. Now let's get into the show. Today we have
Cody Isabel. I run a company called Rewrite and Rise. We work with people from a neuroscience perspective, helping them heal their brain after emotional abuse, specifically with like anxiety and complex PTSD generally.
Yes.
I'm very excited for our conversation today.
Hell yeah.
I don't know if you saw this about me. I'm an EMDR trained psychotherapist. So everything you say there is my everyday life. So I can definitely connect.
Yeah.
Well, how'd you get into the space of healing trauma?
Yeah. So long way around. It was like a progressive thing, to be honest. I've always been interested in like the brain and neuroscience. My background is neuroscience. And so I've just always been curious about what's going on, like mental health and brain health, and what is this? And so I do a ton of research in those realms and fields. And I started doing some coaching where I'm just really working on like mindset stuff, like basic mindset, like very vanilla. And I started really quickly to start to see some specific patterns that I was picking up on in relation to what people are struggling with, especially in relation to their mental health. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? And so that's when I really put on a ton of like deep research into like Dr. Huberman, Dr. Gabor Mate, I think it is, Dr. Caroline Leaf, a lot of these types of like Dr. Amen that are really super zoned in on like trauma and what it can do. Dr. Richard Schwartz, I can never pronounce his name, but the guy that wrote The Body Keeps the Score, a lot of his research.
Bessel van der Kolk.
Yeah, I can never pronounce his name. Dr. Frank Anderson, all those guys, all those girls, and really zoning in on all of their research and diving deep into like their institutes and what they're publishing and all that kind of stuff. I was like, this makes so much sense. What I started to realize, especially when I started getting trained in IFS, internal family systems, is that there is so much that comes from stored trauma and things that gets locked in our body. And I've always been huge on, this is kind of a big debate in neuroscience, but like mind, brain, and body, are they three separate things? Are they all the same thing? Is there a difference between mind and body and all this kind of stuff? Personally, when I'm working with people, consider like the mind, brain, and body as like separate entities. So the body holds the brain holds the mind. And that seems to be really, whether or not like textbook wise, like if I'm debating a neuroscientist, we'd have a different conversation. But for people in the general world, it was really actionable for them to understand that and then understand how trauma and things like this can get stored in our bodies. And how when our body is like a toxic wasteland, it inflames our mind or our brain, and then our brain inflames our mind. So that's kind of how I started to get into a lot of the trauma work. And then I started doing more on social media. So I would post a ton. And as I was posting more and more, I was getting all these comments and engaging in the community and all this kind of stuff. And people were talking about like symptoms and things that they were struggling with and what had happened to them and stuff like that. And so I was like, oh my goodness. And that's where I started to get into like emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, like things like that, that after these relationships, they produce this person that is traumatized. They don't know who they are. They're anxious all the time. They are like flighty and nervousness, energy.
Yeah.
They don't know what they want to do, what their boundaries are, like anything. And I was like, what the heck? I want to help that. And that's kind of a long story, but that's how I kind of got there.
Well, you mentioned something there that I want to dive into a little bit so that the listeners can understand, and that is internal family systems. Tell me a little bit, like, what is that?
Yeah.
So it's a framework that I love that I've been using for so long. Part of the program I do is called a hero, which is to, because a lot of the research I did before trauma stuff is behavioral change. And so I would always talk about becoming someone new. Like if you want to quit something or start something, whatever behavior you want to start or stop, it's way easier to become the type of person that would do or not do that thing. And so it's all about like identity. And so when I got into internal family systems, like this is awesome, because internal family systems considers everybody as like multiple parts, multiplicity, I think is the word that Dr. Frank Anderson uses, and which it considers that we all have like this core self, this internal, like the deepest part of you. Like when you dive deep and deep and deep and deep into you, like you say, I am, like I am Mark or I am Bree. That's the self, which is kind of like the internal parent of your system or the internal leader, whatever we want to think about it. And then you have these parts, and parts get created in like traumatic moments, especially when we're young, because we have to become human faster than we emotionally mature generally. And so when we're kids, we just don't know. We have no idea what the hell's happening. And so we have to create these parts sometimes. So really easy examples, like most kids are curious, right? The self is naturally curious and compassionate. But when you think about like as a kid, you're in middle school, you raise your hand, like you ask a question to the teacher kind of gives you a funny look, your classmates kind of start laughing at you. And then after class, the kids are like, that was a stupid question. I can't believe you did that. You feeling what? Like humiliated, rejected, like maybe abandoned by your friends. Those are big emotions to have to deal with as a kid. And so in that moment, you're like, the self is taking damage. And it's like, this freaking hurts. And those emotions, I don't know if you've ever felt abandonment or rejection, it takes over your entire body. And it doesn't feel freaking good. And so what happens is a part gets created, it gets severed off from the self, and a protector comes out. And now all of a sudden you're going to be judgmental and you're going to start judging people instead of being curious, naturally curious like the self is. Because again, you don't know as a kid that this happens. Like those kids that were making fun of you, they have parts too, and they don't know what they're doing. And you don't know all this stuff. You can't self-soothe yourself. So you create this protector part. And so that's how you can start to build exiles, which is a type of part. There's really three that give us the biggest trouble: exiles, managers, and firefighters. Managers and firefighters are protectors. And then exiles are kind of like that rejection, abandonment, pain, sadness, rage, terror, sexual or emotional abuse can be types of exiles. And those exiles in those moments get shoved down because we don't want to feel them because it takes over your body and it sucks. And so we shove those exiles down. And so this young little baby part of us gets shoved down into our bodies. So it could be any number of things, actions, urges, feelings, thoughts, all sorts of stuff that gets locked away in this like 7-year-old, I mean, that's a random number, 5, 6, whatever year old part. I mean, I literally had a call this morning with someone who had a part from like infancy. Like, I feel like this part was with me in the crib. So I was like, dang, that's an old part. And so that's kind of what happens. That's kind of the big picture. We can dive into like exiles, managers, firefighters, all stuff if you want.
Definitely. I think for, I guess, do you have any questions there?
I am processing for myself at the moment, so go ahead.
So let's get into like a little bit more of an example of those parts and what might happen to someone. Let's say someone that doesn't experience a lot of, I don't know how to say it, motivation for self. So they might be a people pleaser.
Nice.
What in the IFS systems and what you're talking about, how did that happen?
For sure. So people pleaser is most often considered a manager. Just big picture managers are trying to control the present moment. They're trying to control things right now so that the bad thing doesn't happen, essentially. A manager's motto is never again. So never again will Bree feel that much shame or guilt, or never again will Mark feel that rejected. And so what happens then is that protector gets created. And so, for example, the people pleaser, I know an example, a really easy one for me is within an emotionally abusive relationship, but it can be any number of things. Like you could be rejected by like a friend group, but inside of a relationship, let's pretend that it's an abusive partner. But when you please that partner, the abuse doesn't happen. And so when you cater to all their needs and you always say yes, and you don't have the boundaries and you don't stand up for yourself, that people pleasing protector is saving you from feeling the emotional pain, the guilt, the shame. A lot of guilt and shame is used a lot in narcissistic relationships, right? And those are, again, powerful emotions. And so that's an example of how a people pleaser, that manager, could protect the self, you, from feeling those exiled emotions, essentially.
And I chose that example specifically because as an easy way to talk about how some people, all of us, find it hard to put our needs first, or to express, even because we might be trying to please each other, and the lack of communication. And we talk about relationships and all that type of stuff, and a number of changes.
It's a fun time. These parts too, it's fun because the language of IFS is one of the most powerful pieces, because once you understand that what you just described, I've got a people pleasing part of me. Now you can stop saying I am anxious, and you can say a part of me is anxious, or a part of me is a people pleaser. And you can start to talk to that part as the young child that it is. Like I've talked with thousands of parts, and almost every single time these parts think that the self is 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And it doesn't realize that, oh, I'm actually 27 now. I have new resources. I have new abilities. I have new friends. I have new things that I can do instead of people pleasing. And it's just doing that protective role to save us from the pain. It doesn't know typically that that pain isn't going to come anymore because we're older. And so it's doing this protective role. And the other thing too, is you can start to talk to these parts as kids, right? So I don't personally have kids, but babysat my nieces and nephews. And if one of them started a tantrum, if I were to throw them into a closet, lock the door and run away, it would get worse. They wouldn't stop crying. And so that's what we do to our parts a lot of the time. And so we throw anxiety. We're like, especially anxiety is a really easy one, because it's like, oh shit, it's coming on. Like I'm about to get anxious. And we try to shove it away and get it away and stay away from me and don't talk to me. And that's a little kid, a little part of you that you're just throwing away, as opposed to listening to it, understanding it, validating it, and having a conversation with it. And the moment that you do that, first of all, it releases its grip, like that crippling feeling you have, it releases its grip. And then it's almost always, without doubt, willing to shift the behavior. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, and as you say that, the things in my mind are like, what's talked about, inner child work, for instance, all the trauma work. One of my favorite questions is, when you were having that emotional reaction, how old do you feel? Because that gets to that point, right? So, great stuff. And so what about the neuroscience of, we're talking about all these parts, and you were giving the example of emotional abuse, and how do we heal after that? And what is the science behind that?
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. We talked about managers, exiles, and we haven't talked about firefighters. Firefighters kind of react and distract. So a lot of times and I'm only explaining this so that I can then map each to a brain region, because it's kind of cool how that works. That's why I love it so much. There's just as many neuroscientists in the IFS Institute as there are like therapists. So like, I love it. But the firefighters, their motto is react and distract. So that could look like binge eating, binge shopping, panic attacks, anger, sex, porn, drugs, alcohol, all that kind of stuff, high dopamine stuff. It can also look like dissociation, self-injury, suicidal ideation. All of those types of things can look like firefighters, because even suicide ideation is like, I want the self to not suffer. And so that firefighter just wants to get you, the self, away from that pain. And so it's kind of a crazy one. Sometimes people are like, what? You're talking about suicide ideation, and suicide is like, not saying just push it away. But I mean, I've worked with tons of suicidal parts that once they're listened to, they're like, thank you. I've been here for so freaking long and no one ever listens to me. And all of a sudden the thoughts go away when you validate the part. So those are firefighters. They're not always suicidal. Most of the time, it's some type of high dopamine thing, doom scrolling on social media, drugs, sex, things like that. However, each of these parts can be mapped to different brain regions. And so trauma, a lot of the times, like exiles are, you can look at like your peripheral nervous system. So the part of your nervous system that's not in your brain or spinal cord, that's a good enough definition. Everything outside of your brain and spinal cord can be like your periphery. And then your autonomic nervous system is a lot where these types of things get stuck or can get stuck. And these exiles get stuck because they go through the HPA axis. So that's your hypothalamus is the H of HPA. And it's half brain tissue, half endocrine tissue, which is freaking fascinating. So the hypothalamus and the thalamus itself are hypothalamus specifically takes in brain impulses and endocrine and sends out endocrine like to the body. That's how your messages get sent through your body through hormones and stuff. And so in like traumatic moments, your mind is like, holy shit, I can't handle this. And so it shoves it down into your brain, and your brain's like, where do you want me to hold on to this? I only got so many nerve cells. And so it sends a signal first through the front part of your hypothalamus, and then your hypothalamus sends that into your body as stress chemicals, cortisol, epinephrine, adrenaline, all these types of things, straight down through your pituitary gland to your adrenals. And these are glands that then can store these different things in our bodies through the endocrine system and kind of the immune system as well. It's freaking fascinating. And so that's how we can get like an exiled emotion stored in our actual body. Like it's a neuroscience, like when you look at like body keeps score and things like that. So that's exiles. Firefighters oftentimes are our limbic system or the amygdala. Some people call it the like reptilian brain, like the reaction brain. And then managers are most of the time in our prefrontal cortex, or at least the frontal lobe overall, because they are projecting us to the future. I don't want the bad thing to happen. And so you could think of like a manager's anxiety, a firefighter could be fear, because anxiety and fear are kind of different. Like anxiety is more like a higher lobe in the like prefrontal cortex, as opposed to deep in your brain. And it's less of a reaction. Fear is deeper in your brain. And it's like, get away from this thing, react really fast type thing. And so that's kind of how all of these little parts map to your nervous system. And we can talk about like how releasing them works too.
I love it. I think you giving the examples definitely makes it digestible for sure. And I'm just like really, things are just making so much sense. Like clients that I work with that have traumatic experiences that start to manifest in their relationships, whether, or something that's also not talked about is trauma that is resurfaced after birth. Because birth is a traumatic experience, even though it's natural, even if nothing goes wrong in that time, it can unearth, trauma from the past. And so I think talking about this, having this like helps you to understand why that might be happening.
Oh yeah. I mean, birth is an extraordinarily endocrine, like your body is all sorts of stuff is going on physically, mentally, emotionally, endocrine, nervous system. Like it makes a lot of sense. Different types of triggers and things can be poked at, or chemicals that are released in one area get popped back up. And it's hard because trauma, most of the time, of the 5 types of memory, 4 are in your body and only 1 is in your brain. That's the type that you can talk about with words. The rest is in your body, and it comes up as the patterns that you're describing. Birth, I haven't specifically looked into birth, I will say, but when I look at like TBIs, traumatic brain injury is another good example of like trauma that can happen, because you can almost look at birth in some ways as like a traumatic experience, kind of. I mean,
well, and I have friends that are in the medical community, and they talk about every surgery is a traumatic event for your body too, because the way it has to heal and all this other stuff. So
right.
I love that you talked about just any type of operation, surgery, procedure that you have on your body, even though you logically know, like, I'm doing this for a reason, it's going to help me feel better at the end. Your body doesn't understand that. It just knows that it's getting cut into and it's having this stuff, and now it has to heal and repair. And we don't talk about how that is traumatic as well, and how to heal through that.
Right. Yeah. It can be scary.
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of measuring with like metric devices with our clients to measure their bodies. And so when someone releases an exhale, their core body temperature goes up, and I could see that in here. Their blood oxygen changes, their HRV changes, their heart rate changes. There's some really cool stuff that changes because that's how connected our bodies are to our brain and our mind. So in relation to surgery or birth, 100%, there's no way that it wouldn't have an effect.
Yeah. So let's hear about, how does one go towards the healing route? We're talking about all these mechanisms and all the things that happen, and how the splitting and the exiles happen and all this stuff. Well, how do we reintegrate? How do we come back? How do we heal from that?
What you can do is go talk to these parts. So oftentimes what happens is, imagine like your exiles are locked in these cages, okay? And so those are like the deepest wounds that you have. And what happens is these protectors build up like the Great Wall of China between, so they're locked in a jail cell, then they build a wall, and then your managers are right here, and then the self is at the very bottom. So you've got the self at the bottom, you've got a layer of protectors, and then you've got your exiles. And so to start to heal and reintegrate, it's really going and building relationships with your parts and your protectors first. You can really do this with any of them, whether it's a manager or a firefighter. Anxiety is one that I use, is a easy one. Inner critic is a manager that I work with a lot. People beat the crap out of themselves. And so, but going to befriend these protector parts and start to build trust between the self and your protectors. That's the first step, because the self, everyone has the self and everyone has access to the self. It's called the 8 C's. The self is always compassionate, curious, calm, connected, courageous, clear, creative. And so taking those qualities to your protectors and building a relationship with the protectors. So talking to let's just use inner critic and asking that inner critic, like, where's it at in my body? That's the first step. Like, where do I feel in my body? Next step, you start to figure out, okay, how does the self feel towards the inner critic? A lot of the times people are like, I want it to go away. I hate this thing. I don't want to talk to it. It makes me sad. It makes me mad. And say, okay, those are all of those things are other parts, other protectors. And so you have to ask those protectors to kind of step aside. Hey, would it be chill with you if you just step aside for a minute and let me chat with this inner critic? And once you're in a state of curiosity towards the inner critic, then you can start to ask it, like, how old do you think I am? And then update on how old you actually are. You could ask it, what do you want me to know about you? What do you want me to understand about you? When did you first learn, have to pick up this role, this protective role? What is your biggest fear? That's the biggest one. It's like a huge one. Like, what is your biggest fear here? What are you protecting me against? Like, what's the fear? If you didn't do this protective role, you didn't beat the shit out of me, like as an inner critic, what is your fear would happen? Well, you would embarrass yourself in front of people, then you'd be lonely, then you'd be sad, then you'd be depressed, then you might hurt yourself. And you can take it down, all of those different fears. And I was like, holy shit, thank you. And then show it some compassion. I appreciate you. I could see, validate it. I could see why you would be doing this protective role and beating me up like this. 100% could see that. Thank you for being here for me for so long. Like, you've been doing this for a long time. So listen to it, validate it, understand it, and then move into, let's pretend that I could heal what you're protecting me from, and you knew that you didn't have to worry about that anymore. What would you rather do? And like inner critics, a lot of the times they want to be like a trusted advisor. They're like, just run some stuff past me. That's it. That's all I'm asking. And it's like, okay, that's cool. Other times, like, I talk to parts that want to color, that want to be in nature, that want to be go travel, they want to explore, they want to play in like puddles. Like, you got to remember, these parts are children. They are kids. When they say I want to color, it's because maybe they didn't get to color as a kid because they were protecting you and they had to take on that role. And so that's what they want to go do. And then the last thing you can ask them is, what can I do for you in the future? What can the self do for you in the future? So when you start to feel like you need to criticize me and beat me up inside of me, what can I do to help? Because I know you're scared. If that's happening, I know you're scared and you're worried that something bad's going to happen to the self. What can I, the self, do to make sure that you feel calm, cool, collected, and okay? And let me lead from self as opposed to being manager-led. That's a lot of the problems I see. You mentioned in relationships. Like, I see a lot of people that are manager-led or firefighter-led in relationships, or even worse, exile-led, where they're coming from shame or guilt. And it's like, oh, crap, that's not good, because it's never calm usually. But once you create this relationship with these parts, and you do that with all of your protectors, or the ones that are popping up, you can go to your exiles. So easier examples, like I was working with someone who has bipolar, and we were working with their manic part. And the manic part was an exiled part. Most people that have been manic in that way can probably relate to the feeling that they would want to exile their manic part, because it causes a lot of destruction sometimes.
Yeah.
And so this person, that's how they felt. And so they shoved this manic part down, created an exile. And so this is early when I was starting to do some of this. I went and talked to the exile first. And I didn't get permission from all the protectors. And some of her protectors we hadn't built a relationship with. And so what happened is we went to talk to this exile, had a good conversation. But then afterwards, she calls me and says, I've got to kill myself. And I was like, what? What's going on? And she's like, I feel like I have to kill myself. I was like, okay, let me talk to this part. And so we start talking to that firefighter. And I was like, what's going on? Tell me what you're worried about here. It's like, she's going to suffer. Like, you started talking to that manic part. It's going to cause her to suffer. Her family's going to leave her. No one's going to like her. We're going to spend all this money. Like, I've got to stop it. And I was like, oh my God, I can understand that. I said I could understand that, but I asked her to talk to this part and say, can you tell that part that you could understand why it's not worried, and that you understand that in the past, that's what it thought it had to do, but it doesn't have to anymore. And that we're sorry for not getting its permission before talking to this exile. And so once we calmed it down a little bit, that protector, it relaxed and started to trust the self could handle the conversations. And so that's why you got to be careful when you go to exiles, because they can stir up protectors that you weren't ready for. It's a really intense one. Other times it's like binge drinking or shopping. Those are really two big ones I see a lot. Like after I do exile work, they're like, I went on a shopping spree. And I was like, crap, forgot to talk to that protector. So it's not always that intense, but if you go right to an exile, it can be kind of dangerous sometimes. But the ultimate goal is to go to that exile and be able to unburden the exile. It's holding this burden. And the hard part about exiles is they're trapped in this loop over and over and over and over again. Like I was working with someone who were neglected as a child, and I was an exile. And that exile of hers was just literally spinning in this circle over and over and over, locked outside and not able to get in, just banging on the door. And it's just in that loop over and over and over, stored in her body. And so that's the burden that part, that exile is carrying, that can take over the whole body, that feels like abandonment, rejection, and like terror, because you're like, what the hell? Like, one secure attachment I'm supposed to have is abandoning me right now. What's happening? And it's freaking out. And so that's a burden that it carries. And so then what you can start to do is start to understand and witness what it is that it wants you to feel. This is the part that's going to be the most intense usually, because you're going to let this exile really let you feel it. And it gets intense. Like I've had people like scream. I've had people jump up and like bang the wall. Like there's all sorts of stuff that like somatically, body-wise gets released. And that's when the body temperature usually like skyrockets, like an exothermic reaction. And so you witness what's going on. And as you're doing that, you're lighting up their limbic system, that autonomic nervous system, and you're starting to relight up those memories, bring them up into working memory. And then as those are in working memory, you can reparent that part. And when you reparent the part, that same memory gets restored back into your longer term memory, your memory bank, as a not as traumatic issue any longer. And so it's kind of cool. You do the reparenting, you pull them out of that trauma loop. So you go retrieve them. You ask them to kind of release the burden. You can release it into light or fire or water. Dr. Frank Anderson is always about the elements. So I pull a lot from him. So you can release that burden. And when you release the burden, then that's really when you start to integrate, literally integrate. So it's like, okay, protectors, anxious part, inner critic, like firefight, everybody come here. Like, can you see now that this exile is no longer burdened? It's no longer causing us trouble. And once they're like, yeah, I can see that. It's like, awesome. Can we all integrate back together and release some of the things that we've had to do, these roles that we've had to pick up? And they're always like, hell yeah, this is awesome. Because by that point, you've talked to all these protectors. So you know that one wants to color, that one wants to explore, that one wants to relax. And so now all these protectors get to release their roles and they get to go do their thing. And this exile now gets to get integrated into the self, and we become more self-led. And so that was that's 101, but that was a long explanation, but that would be how you do some of the healing.
Yeah. And there's so much there that I want to highlight in terms that we use in everyday life. Self-acceptance. So we're letting those exiles back in. We're playing well together, all these parts of ourself, the awareness, then the accepting of ourself, and then the reintegration and kind of moving forward. So, yeah, that's beautiful.
I was just sitting here, just like taking all of this stuff in, because you talked about how reparenting yourself, and as parents, kids are mirrors. They reflect back to us. Cause I had one of the questions down was, how do you heal parts that you might not know are there? Like you're talking about going to those locked cages. And I was like, hold on, these tiny humans we created, they're literally a reflection of what is left to heal, what we need to work on. And so
yeah,
answered that myself.
And it's very apparent. Our kids will do or say something and we're like, oh, wow, they got that from us. And that comes from some place that I need to do some healing around.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I also had a question. Do you have visualizations that you guide people through to get them to these places? And, especially if somebody's like, okay, I know I have this thing that I need to work through. I mean, obviously a lot of the stuff you said was pretty intense, and would definitely recommend to have a professional guide you through this for sure. Is there anything that people can do a little bit on their own? If they see this, like, oh, okay, like, but how do you do that in a safe way?
Oh yeah. So most protectors you can talk to, managers or firefighters, that's what I love about IFS is I gave some extreme examples, but the vast majority of IFS you can do by yourself, like so much of it, and talk to these protectors and just get to know your parts, and really start to build awareness. It's one of the biggest steps when I work with people. They stop saying I am anxious and they start saying, an anxious part of me is here. And just starting to again, the language to build awareness around your parts and then starting to talk to them. I personally have my clients name a lot of their parts too. Like my anxiety's name is Mamba. Earlier you mentioned Jerry, that's another one of my parts. And so being able to build that awareness around your parts and start to, even just the questions I was asking, like, what are you scared of? Like, what do you want me to know? What do you want me to understand? Those questions are super, super helpful. And then there's also a IFS path meditation. It's freaking beautiful. I love it. It still gets me every time because being self-led is a continuous journey. It's more of a commitment than it is like a destination. But it's a path meditation, and it was really just about like you visualize literally. It can be any path. Like what I'm sure both of you guys have different paths in your mind than I do. But what you do is like there's a gate at the front of the path, and the self asks the parts, hey, will you guys just sit right here? I'm just going to walk up this path. I'm going to be safe. It's going to be cool. And then I'll come back and we can reconnect. And what you do is go on that path, go on that walk and start to feel what it feels like, that self energy, or there's tons of different names, but like most people like talk about like that buzzy, like energetic feeling they start to get when they're doing this path. And doing that meditation is a really, really easy thing you can do at home by yourself to start to build trust with your parts and yourself, because that's at the core of it. Your protectors don't trust the self to protect itself. And so the path meditation is a really easy way to start to build the trust by yourself. And then once you build some trust, some basic trust, you can start to talk to these parts. And at that point, I mean, parts can be colors, shapes, sounds, as far as like what's happening in their head. Pictures, movies, like feelings, thoughts, actions, urges, like all sorts of different types of things. And when I'm working with someone, like, as I'm sure you know, you don't have to know what's in their mind. I just listen to the part. So does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm excited to do that. I will be going through that myself.
Oh yeah, I like it. I've got some different like pictures and things that I created to kind of help people like visually see the system that's set up that I use, like to literally see what managers, firefighters, protectors, all that kind of stuff could look like. But
yeah.
That might help if you have aphantasia.
I am upset you brought that up. And also I'm wondering if that is not a result of maybe some trauma. that I've experienced. Maybe
You're-
I cannot visualize because of trauma.
Your visualization process has been exiled.
Yeah.
Possibly. I mean, I've crazier things have been parts. I mean, I've had someone that had eczema, because again, when you're thinking about the body, the brain, and the mind, the body holds on to all this stuff. And your eczema is part psychoneuroimmunology. There's a ton of psychoneuroimmunology research around that, where it's not crazy. Allergies, like, I know it sounds crazy, but again, your mom or dad saying you're allergic to cats and telling you that can become something that gets codified into your nervous system, like peanuts. And I am not telling people who have allergies to go do these things. I'm just saying, like, this is like empirical research that has been done and shown people that start with an allergy or something like that, or and work through some of these types of modalities, not just IFS, even EMDR is another huge one. There's a ton of research behind EMDR or ART even, that you can see these things. So it's possible. At this point, I wouldn't say like anything is possible. Like, the brain and nervous system is so cool.
It really is. And I feel like we just know the tip of the iceberg with it, really. Like, we're still learning so much all the time, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have the ability to fully comprehend the brain or to measure it in any way. I want to transition a little further into the relationship dynamic and neuroscience and what it says about connection, sexual connection, and all that aspects. You know, everybody likes to talk about sex, so let's do it.
I love it. Yeah. It's interesting because I have a backdoor into sexual connection, because again, a lot of the times I'm working with people after emotional abuse and narcissistic abuse, and they are coming from relationships where they were abused and they're trauma bonded. And a trauma bond is an extraordinarily deep neural issue, if you want to call it that. And a huge piece of it comes from sexual connection, make-up sex, things like that. Because you get a gigantic spurt of oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, when you sexually connect, that are like bonding you and pairing you together during sex or intimacy. And so it can lead to some problems in an abusive relationship, but in a healthy relationship, it's like one of the best things you could possibly do is sexually connect, intimately connect, to start to release and bond closer neurologically. A hack that I talk a lot about is like is breathing. Like, while you're having sex, if you sync up your breath, you can release, I forgot what percentage more oxytocin, but you can release more oxytocin, just big picture, if you sync up your breath while you're having sex. So it's kind of an interesting.
Now we're getting into some tantric practices here.
Yeah.
So.
Nice. I don't even know as much about that. That sounds cool.
I mean, you know, we haven't said this yet, but Cody is also a Reiki master. And so, in my experience, I'm not a Tantra expert, but there's a lot between Reiki and Tantra, and they all fit really well together. It's about the mind, body, intimacy, and utilizing more connection through breath, through eye gazing, through a number of tactics to just become closer bonded in those moments.
That's cool. I like that. I don't know as much about like Tantra or Tantra, heard of it. But Reiki, I love Reiki. And I've seen some interesting Reiki experiments or sexual experiences with Reiki. Maybe that is what Tantra is, but I understand like what's happening in the brain around those types of things, but like with the oxytocin and the release of some of those things, especially in your like periphery, but they're cool. And it's one of the best things you can possibly do. I was watching one of your guys' other episodes with, I forgot the lady's name. She was talking about the different types of sex. I was like, oh, that's a great idea.
Hannah.
Like
Hannah
maintenance
Dindorfer,
and I forgot what it was, like
exploration.
Sex.
Yeah.
Yes, that was the term. I freaking love when people make up words. Sexploration. Yeah.
I've got a friend
awesome.
you should meet.
I was gonna say you should meet our friend Jordan.
He makes up almost
language.
He does have his own language. Every other sentence has a made up word in it. It's wonderful.
Every other word is a made up word.
Well, that may be true too. Depends on the day. So
yeah.
I
Oh my
love
God.
it. I love that. The a lot of the times what can get in the way of some of that sexual connection are parts. So guilt, shame, especially I see it a lot in guys that feel or guilty, asking for different types of things, or I see that in women sometimes as well. And so sometimes like we take managers and firefighters into the bedroom, which can turn into not good things. And sometimes a manager can prevent you from having a conversation, a sexual conversation, or something. I want to have more sex. I want to have less sex. I want this kind of sex, whatever. Which then can lead to that manager is like strangleholding the behavior. So the conversation doesn't get had. And then a firefighter has to take over, where then a guy is or a girl is watching porn or masturbating more or different things like that, which is a firefighter. And so it's such an interesting dynamic that can start to be built up in relation to why sexual connection doesn't happen necessarily sometimes.
Yeah. And in that framework, we would also say, mind body connection, all this stuff, that firefighters are could be a leading reason for sexual dysfunction.
Right. Yeah. There's a ton of research around that. Yes. Yeah. There's a lot around those types of things that pop up as well.
And the two topics that come to mind when I think of like this conversation and exiles is the two things that bring the most amount of shame for people, and that is sex and money.
Yep.
You know,
and
and what might be happening there as I think about it. So.
Oh yeah. That's very, very true. I have a client literally who has money, like limiting beliefs and stuff, right? And what we found is that there was an exile, young part of her, that when she was younger, almost everybody has like a main fridge and then like they're like a garage fridge, right? And so she had a garage fridge, and she remembers like one of her parents or both of her parents lost their jobs or something as she was a kid. That garage fridge used to be stacked all the way to the top with tons of food, and just over time, over the months that her parents didn't have jobs, they got lower and lower and lower and lower, and that really freaked her out. And so it really put into like a scarce, like lack type of fear and exile that was created. And it led to all sorts of different managers and firefighters in relation to money for her, and triggers that pop up. So I 100% agree that is that's can pop up.
And you said some great things there about lack mindset, growth mindset that we could totally go on, but we're short on time, and there's one thing I want to get to with you. And that is something I heard you say about motivation for change, because we're talking about all these things of making changes and ways to heal and ways to connect. And you were talking about where motivation comes from, and it comes from action rather than, thought or anything like that. And so I wanted to get you talking on that for just a moment, and from the neuroscience background.
For sure, yeah. So like neurologically, your brain does 5 things: senses things, perceives things, feels things, thinks things, and does things. And you can go up and down that spectrum. And so when you're thinking, people are looking for motivation, and I feel like I'm probably not the first one to ever say, I think Tony Robbins said this, but action creates motivation. It's like my number one go-to I love to think about. So like when I work with people who are depressed, for example, sometimes people are just asking me to do too big of things. And they just don't have the pathway in their brain for that action. And so they can't even get out of bed. And I was like, okay, well, could you just sit up? Could you just do that 5 days in a row? Just sit up one time a day. And they're like, okay, yeah, I could do that. And slowly over time, that action starts to, they get a dub, they get a win. And they're like, holy crap, like I can do this. And they start to build that hope. Like, okay, I mean, if all I have to do is sit up, I could do that. I was like, great. Can you put one toe on the ground the next 12 days or whatever? And they're like, okay, yeah, I could do that. And what's starting to, behavioral activation is like the technical term. But you start to get to this place where your actions are generating empowering feelings and changing your state, and feelings come from your body, right? They're like reactions in our bodies that happen, which then can start to shift you from ants, like automatic negative thoughts, to pets, positive empowering thoughts. And so action you took generates a good feeling, which then generates a pet. And then the next time all of this comes around, that pet generates, well, I could do that again. So you take another action and you get more good feelings. And you're building these pathways in your brain. There's a lot of research, 63 to 84-ish days is a lot of the, like Dr. Caroline Leaf does a lot of research on this. And she talks about how it takes about 84 days to create a new neural pathway with new axons, dendrites, all of them starting to connect. And so that's how like neurologically action can get you out of some of these funks and get you into a state of motivation more often. Because the more and more you do something, the more and more easier it is to access that state. Because again, motivation is an emotional state. You can be motivated 1 second, then you lose the game, you lose the Super Bowl, and guess what? You're not feeling motivated. And so it's a transient thing. Like it's something that can come and go. And I feel like a lot of the times when people get into these funks, they lose hope that motivation can come back, but it's not true. I mean, you can almost always even trick people in being motivated because you can just think, like, ask them, like, go to a place in the past where you were motivated. Can you put yourself in those shoes? Do you feel motivated? And they're like, oh my God, I feel motivated. And so that's some of the stuff around that.
How come it's so hard to change? How come it takes that long period? Like, let's talk about neurologically, like change, how that happens.
Yeah, so neurons are being grown. I say for people that are listening, like if you just imagine your brain like a hill that's been snowed on, right? And it's like you're at the top of the hill and there's all the sleds. And after a day of tons of people sledding, there's all the ruts that are in the snow, right? So those are neural pathways and those are behavioral patterns. And so it's way, way, way easier when you put your sled down to go down that rut because the snow's packed down, you can slide down easier. And so that's why that's a current established behavioral pattern. And so it's really hard because it's kind of psychedelic research is looking at some of this because psychedelics sometimes is like just imagining like snow coming down on that mountain. That's why it's so much easier to change behaviors after some psychedelics. But if you don't have psychedelics, the reason why it's so hard is because you have to essentially lift your sled up, put it into a new fresh snow and start to build your own ruts. And you have to destroy the old ones. And so neurologically, what that means is you are pulling apart neural cells, literally pulling apart. I mean, it's really dendrites, like really tiny parts of neuron cells that are pulling apart from one another over their first like 84 days. So you're breaking an old pattern. Brain cells are cells, right? If you get a cut on your hand, it hurts. It doesn't feel good. When you're pulling apart nerve cells, they are cells. It hurts. They don't want to do that. Our cells don't want to do that. That's why it sucks and it's really hard to pull them apart. And at the same time, you're laying down a new neural pathway. Like this is like overly simplified, but you're laying down a new set of neurons that are now interlacing and connecting. And it takes a lot of energy to create those new connections, a lot of sleep, a lot of ATP kind of, but there's a lot of energy that goes into putting together cells though, especially neural cells. And that's why it kind of takes so long. That's not always the case because sometimes in trauma, you can have an instant shift, which I'm sure you understand with the EMDR stuff, but big picture, if you're trying to start working out or some like non-traumatic things, that's some of what's going on in your head over those. And you can see it. It's really cool. Like you can see neurologically these nerve cells growing, pulling apart from each other and then growing together in a different direction. Like it's really cool.
There's some beautiful artwork that's just nervous system stuff. I love it.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Me too. I feel you on that.
No, I love that he touched on the psychedelics because I feel like that is something that we will have to maybe have you back on, or we'll have to explore in another episode for sure. So I had that question earlier, but I was like, I don't know what his understanding or background is on that. But yeah, that was so informative for me. And I'm sure our listeners too. I love this.
Heck
but
yeah.
Tell our listeners where they can find you and connect with you.
Yeah, it's Mind Brain Body Lab everywhere. At Mind Brain Body Lab on all the social medias. If you message me on any of those, I'll reply 100%. And then if you want to email me, you can just email me, Cody at rewriteandrise.com. So feel free to reach out. We put out a ton of content around these types of topics around the mind, brain, and body, like practical neuroscience and psychology tools for your mind, brain, and body to help improve mental and emotional health. So following any of those any social media, Mind, Brain, and Body Lab would be a great resource, I think.
Awesome. And we'll have those linked in the show notes for sure, so you can find them. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. I loved this conversation so much.
Hell yeah. Thank you. Thank you guys for all the work you guys are doing too. Couples and
you.
relationships and connection are extraordinarily important and not something that is focused on, I don't believe, enough. It's not good for the survival of our species. So I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. I think it's badass.
Thank you.
The journey you guys have started and are blazing the trail on fearlessly, or maybe a little scared, but still moving forward. So that's badass.
But we're steering the
you should
course.
Be proud of yourselves. Hell yeah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Cody. All right. We'll see you all next week. Bye. Are you wanting to create a deeper connection within your relationship and enjoy more pleasure while doing so? Then make sure you grab our free 4-step guide to help you create a weekly routine for reconnecting with your partner. The link is in the show notes.